So hi all, today we look at TestNG interview questions. I'm assuming that you already know TestNG, so this is kind of a revision. Also, we look at some code examples wherever applicable to revise TestNG. Okay, so let's start. First question is, what is TestNG and why do we use TestNG for automation testing? So TestNG stands for Test Next Generation. It is a testing framework in Java inspired by JUnit and NUnit, but more powerful and flexible. So JUnit and NUnit, these are basically used for unit testing, and TestNG is used by automation testers for testing the applications. So why do we use TestNG? Because of these features. It allows you to organize test cases with annotations. So there are some annotations you can use for functions, and what it does, it helps you with the initialization, before the suite starts, for the teardown, for the setup. All that can be easily managed using these annotations. So it helps you in reusability of code, modularity. Okay, next is supporting data driven testing. So data driven testing is if you are reading data from Excel or JSON, you can use data providers. So you can parse the data into some object and then pass it to the test cases. And parameters, these are when you have a small set of variables that you want to pass to test, you can use the @parameters annotation, which so the parameters are set in the TestNG XML file. Okay, so you can test using different set of data. Third point is parallel execution. So if you have worked on testing framework, you'll know that tests sometimes run in thousands, or if not thousands, then at least hundreds. And to run it in sequence means it takes a lot of time. So mostly test cases are run in parallel, and TestNG provides you a means of doing parallel run very easily using the TestNG XML files. The fourth point is that it helps you generate reports. So there's a inbuilt functionality, so you will get reports automatically, very plain reports. But most testing frameworks, you will find extend reports and listener classes which will be used to generate comprehensive reports. And last is, of course, it works seamlessly with Selenium WebDriver and integrates well with build tools like Maven and CI/CD pipelines using Jenkins. So you can add some dependency, you can add plugins, and it just works smoothly. Okay, so these are the advantages of using TestNG, and that is why it's widely used for testing frameworks. So let's go to the next question. What are the different annotations in TestNG? So there are many annotations. I've just noted down the most common ones over here. We have configuration annotations. As I mentioned earlier, you have before suite, after suite, before test, before class, before method. So these are annotations you can use for functions, so that it runs when you're running tests through a TestNG XML file. These particular functions are called in an order. So if you look at the TestNG XML file, you have the suite. Within the suite, you're defining some tests and classes and methods, and these are the actual test cases, right? So before suite means before the actual suite begins, you will run that function. Then you'll have before the test, before class, and before the method. So you can define them to do the initialization. Okay, then you have @test. So all the test cases are annotated by @test, which means that it's a test case. And for data handling, as we discussed earlier, this is for providing data, variable data to the test cases. And reporting and customization, you have listener classes. Listener is an interface here, and there are many methods in it which can be implemented. So according to your needs of how much comprehensive data you want every time a test passes or fails. Okay, so these are the most common annotations which you should be aware of, and the order is as follows. So it will run in this order only. So before suite, before test, before class, before method, and then after method, after class, after test, and after suite. Yeah, so suites. So if you get confused, just try to remember this TestNG XML file, how you define, and you will understand the order in which it will run. So this is sometimes asked in interviews. They might give you just some of them and ask you the order in which it will run. So now we look at the next question, which is related to the priority. What is the default priority of TestNG test cases? So in TestNG, the default priority is 0. So if you're not giving any priority, it is considered to be 0. And in that case, it will run in alphabetical order, which is not always true. Sometimes it depends on the JVM. But if you want specifically them, they should run in particular order, it's better to provide a priority or depends on. So if you have a test which has a priority 0, it will run before priority 1, and negative priority is also possible. So -1 will run before 0. Okay, so if you consider this example, this is a class which has 2 tests, register new user and test nothing. Ideally this should run first and then this one, but if you look at it, I've set the priority 2 here and this has priority 1, which means test nothing has more priority than register new users. So when I run this, you will see that test nothing tests before the register new user. Okay, so this is, anyways, there is a before method, so it always runs, it always opens the browser. So this is test nothing, and you see that it is running before the register new user. That is because it has a higher priority. Okay, so this is how you set priorities. You can change based on how you want it to run. Okay, how do you disable a test case in TestNG? So when you put a enabled is equal to false in the annotation, that test will not run. So if I make this, let's say enabled is equal to false. Okay, and now if I run it again, the register new user test case will not run. Okay, so you see only one test run this time because we've put enabled is equal to false. So another way, so this is one of the common ways to run, to disable a test case, but there are other ways also. You can put an ignore annotation. So if I put an ignore annotation over here, okay, at the class level, we can do it at the class level or we can do it at the test level. So if I put it at the okay, if I put it at the class level, nothing will run. Okay, you see no test are run. You can also put an ignore at a test level. I can put it here and then again no test will here will run here because one, I have enabled it as false, enabled as fault, and the second one I am putting as ignore. So at a test class level or at the test case level we can ignore it. Now we can also skip test by other methods. If you put enabled is equal to false in TestNG, or you can exclude the test cases in the TestNG file. So if you look at TestNG here, what I can do is I can make enabled is equal to false here at the test level, which means that the test will not run at all, or individual methods I can just do an exclude instead of include. In that case this test will not run. So these are some of the ways in which you can, you may want to not have a test case run. You can disable it, or you can use some annotations to remove it temporarily from your test run. Now next is what is depends on method and depends on group. So here again, depends on means when a test is dependent on some specific test, then you only run it. It is also sometimes if a test is very important and everything else depends on that test, then you may want to put a depends on method. For example, if there is a login method and if that is only failing, then it makes no sense to do any of the other testing, right? So depends on method can be used to control that kind of dependency. Okay, and this next is depend on groups. So similar to depend on methods, you can use depend on groups. So entire group, if it passes, then you will go ahead with the next set. So you can see here depends on, I have a verify order details test which depends on the test order complete test case. Okay, this is a test order complete. So if this fails or if it doesn't run for any reason, then the verify order details will not run. Okay, so you can use depends on method or depends on group. The next question is, what is a TestNG XML file and why do we use it? So here we've already seen this is a TestNG XML file. So you can use it to configure how you want your test cases to run, in how many of the test cases or classes you want to run. You can put the listener classes here if you have implemented them, the classes that you want to run. If you, let's say you have a sanity run and you want a specific set of classes to be run, then you can add it. You can include or exclude test cases. You can also provide parameterized data in the TestNG file. So all that can be done using TestNG, and we usually have multiple TestNG files. So something like this one is a TestNG file for sanity. So it will run the sanity group. Okay, and similarly you can add the classes and whatever you want to include. So TestNG makes it easy to segregate test cases and run only the subset that you want, and also pass data that we saw through parameterized. Okay, so right, grouping, everything we've controlled, we've discussed. How do you run test in parallel in TestNG? So here again we have a keyword called as parallel, and it tells you what has to run in parallel. So you can run the classes in parallel or the methods in parallel, and how many times, how many tests have to run in parallel, that is provided using a thread count. So over here also you see, if I remove this, let me just remove this. Okay, so methods, classes, instances, test. So what has to run in parallel, that you can mention here, and of course the thread count. Okay, but remember that if you are implementing this, you also have to make sure that your test cases are thread safe. So if you've written your setup where you are initializing a driver, then it has to be thread safe, otherwise running in parallel will cause problems, it will fail. Okay, so this is the way to have parallelism in TestNG. So the next question is, how do you parameterize test cases in TestNG? As discussed earlier, there are two ways. One is using parameters and the other is the data provider. So you can provide this annotation to the test that you want to run and provide an input parameter which will take the value. Okay, so let's look at this example. I just modified it, parameters and user. Okay, so this test is going to take input parameter user from the parameters and we will print it out. Okay, and if we look at the TestNG file, then I am providing the parameter user and the value that I am sending is test admin. Okay, so if I run this test, not here, I will use the TestNG XML of course. So over here, okay, I'm just running the test nothing file test case. Okay, and we expect test admin to be printed out. It's a bit slow. Okay, so over here you see test admin is the user. So we printed out the user. The user was properly passed from the TestNG file to the test. Okay, then the next method is of course using the data provider. So we define a data provider. So in this case it is providing login data, which is the admin and the password, and then we provide the data provider name to the test and it will take the values. Okay, so for example here I have a data provider which is called currency and it provides these three values, dollar, pound and euro. Okay, and I'm using it in one of my tests. Okay, the data provider is currency, and since it's from a different package altogether, I have given it specific name. And this test will run 3 times because it is taking 3 values. Okay, so let me run this. Okay, the first time dollar. Okay, the second time with pound and the third time also it will run with euro. Okay, so this is how you provide multiple data sets to a particular test using @parameters or @data provider. So data provider is for more complex data. When you're taking it from Excel or JSON files, you use data provider, and if there are few values you will use parameters. Okay, next is invocation count. Invocation count means how many times a test should run. So if I provide a invocation count as 3, then my test will run 3 times. Okay, and it can also be combined with the thread pool size, which means it will run twice in parallel, like 2 tests will run in parallel and it will run 5 times. So, and why do we use this? We use this for load and performance testing, run the same API multiple times, so you can give hundreds in the invocation count, or also from stability validation. If there is a test which is flaky and you're debugging or something, you can also give an invocation count here to see what is the probability it is failing, right? And so repeated validation, flaky test, or stress testing, that can all be done using the invocation count. And the last one is listeners. What are listeners? So listeners allow tracking of test execution, and common listener interfaces are iTestListener and iSuiteListener. So if we see an example here, okay, this is my listener class, and so iTestListener is an interface. Okay, it has a lot of methods, default methods, and you can implement this method so that you can get the kind of information you want in when you are running it for your particular project. So here I've also have extend report implemented, so that is used in listener class. And on test success, when the test starts, I'm getting the name and just printing out when the test is passed. When the test fails, then we take a screenshot and we add it in the report. So this kind of implementation can be done using listeners. Okay, so listener is a very powerful way to get information for the events that are happening during the test. So these are the basic questions, important questions on TestNG, and if you practice this, if you understand this, then mostly you will not have any issues during interviews. Okay.